So, as a candidate of the Liberation Party, we are really strong believers that liberation is a human right, and it's not a privilege, and it should not be treated as a privilege. And when we say that, we're looking at things such as economic justice. We're looking at, housing being treated as a human right and not a excuse me, not a privilege. And as you stated, when we look at currency and we look at who's actually in control, as to our abilities to even be able to gain employment. We have to go back to our legislators on a state and on a federal level. And we have to make sure that we're electing people who are going to put people over profit, and people over politics when running for these key offices at a local and at a state level. So very happy to hear from you and to hear you speak about MMT and to talk about moving forward, to ensure that we're not allowing, national news about the deficit to scare us, but more so to mobilize us into making the needed changes so that we can ensure that, all Americans, that all Virginians have the right to equitable employment, protection of unions as well, and that we get rid of this right to work, and move towards support. And I'm an educator, and so I've been an educator for over 14 years. And so when we start talking about collective bargaining, that is something that is very, very near and dear to me. Virginia's, what is it, the 10th wealthiest state, so we're up there, and there's no reason, no good reason for us to still have people who are in the category of a have not, for a lack of better words, and seeing the negative adverse effect that continues to play. And I believe in being proactive, right? And so if we invest in the front end on our, in our communities across the Commonwealth, then that will save us, a lot of money on the back end from having to put out, in many of our social services, programs and so on, because we're investing in people, we're investing in our communities. As far as Reed Larson and as far as Vance Muse, I don't think that you can condemn one without condemning the other. And so, both of them have lots of blood, for a lack of better words, on their hands, and they both have strong involvement. And, when we look at, the right to work legislation, developed back in the 1940s, it was created to disempower working people and unions. And so it is something that, I will definitely fight very hard to end. And as I said earlier, I'm a teacher, and I believe this May, next month, May 2021, two bills from the House and the Senate are coming back to the table just for us to engage in collective bargaining. I work, it takes me about 3.5 hours to get to work. Because as I told a young lady earlier, she asked where I lived, and I said I live in Middle Peninsula. I work all the way in Northern Virginia, and people say, well, you're absolutely crazy, and I'm going to take that, okay? But the harsh reality is that in order for me to be able to take care of my family, I need to go where I'm able to have a better living wage. And, up there in Northern Virginia, I'm going to get paid more. But if you just think of the major sacrifices that my family, is dealing with, right now during the pandemic, I'm virtual. That's probably the only good thing that has come out of this pandemic, for the moment, but not for our students, unfortunately. But I have to travel like 3.5 hours to get to work. And with the DC traffic, I'm looking at 5 hours to get back home oftentimes. And so, again, looking at making sure that, local and state employees are able to engage in collective bargaining. That should not be something that we're still, that's what, over 70 years old. This is something that should have been addressed a long time ago. And when we go back to, putting people over profit, our legislators are failing us. And so we keep getting little crumbs, or we, as I believe it's been almost a year now that Governor Ralph Northam kind of tabled the current bills regarding collective bargaining and said, okay, we'll readdress it in May of 2021. And so it's kind of like we keep kicking the can down the road, and his term is almost over, so will that be postponed yet again? So it's time for us to start supporting, our employees, our unions, and supporting I would be remiss if I wouldn't even talk about domestic workers, you know, and ensuring that they are protected as well, as far as their rights. I've did some volunteer work with Care in Action, and there was this one young lady who told her story about, she had just retired, domestic worker, and told about how some of the things that she had to deal with as far as being exposed uh, inappropriately by, households that she worked for, but there was no one for her to go and, share her grievances with. There was no protection, and her employer or employers knew that, and just the degrading things that she's had to deal with, the low wages just to be able to earn any form of compensation, and the lack of protection, whether it's regarding workers' compensation, regarding paid time, paid time off. As an educator, one thing that I struggled with, my last pregnancy with my 4-year-old, I was a high risk pregnancy, and there is no time built in, for maternity leave. It's kind of either you have sick days already banked up that you can use, or you don't. And so many parents, are going back into, mothers and even fathers are going back into the work times to nurture, their children. And so again, putting those protections around workers and prioritizing our needs and just uplifting our rights and our voices. And I think that's something that's really, really big to me when we talk about, abolishing right to work, or repealing right to work, and supporting unions, is being able to have our voices, working conditions, or whether it's our salaries. I'm going to tell one last story. When I became an assistant principal, I was young, I think maybe about 26, 27 years old. And I remember the assistant superintendent and superintendent calling me in their office, and they said to me, we're going to give you this opportunity because your SOL scores as a science teacher were excellent. You've earned it. But I want you to know that the school board does not want you in this position. Predominantly white school board in a very rural area, Essex County. And he said to me, I want you to know you have several things against you. You're Black, you're a woman, and you're very educated, and so I'm giving you this opportunity, so it's your job to keep it. And so when new administration came in, the superintendent knew I was applying to become a principal. I had already had a few years as AP under my belt, and he looked me in the eyes and said to me, "You will never become a principal, so you need to change your career." Now, understand that I had previously spoke about my grievances regarding my salary, because they were bringing in new administrators, and they were getting paid much more than I was. And I had the years, I had the record, I was doing great things. But there was no way that, as much as I tried, to negotiate my salary, it was a moot point. It wasn't going anywhere. So it's really important that we are, uplifting workers across the Commonwealth, their voices, their needs, their concerns, their protections, to include health insurance, workers' compensation. I know that it's not 100% related, but even childcare, so that people can get out there in the workforce, and they can be able to participate in gainful employment. I'll kind of follow your lead, but I would love to, do both. I would love to tell more about my run for governor, about the Liberation Party, and I would, love even more to hear from the people that are on the line. So I had a brief opportunity to speak to Dad and Tommy, and I hope to be able to continue those conversations. And so I made the decision to run for governor, not out of my own personal interest, but out of necessity. And so what I've saw and learned firsthand, since 2018, my spark came when my brother, who was also a teacher, he was a high school biology teacher, was murdered in Richmond. A full day of high school biology. And so my brother was unarmed, and he was completely undressed, and he was having a mental health crisis. And so that was my spark. And again, I always knew that I wanted to help our youth. And that's where, I moved from wanting to be a pediatrician to saying, okay, medical field is not for me, and trying my feet in education. And I loved it, and moved up from being a middle school science teacher to a school administrator at the time my brother was murdered. And, after his murder, I pleaded and tried to work with and go through the chains of command to work with our local and Richmond legislators and our state legislators to say, look, I understand that we can't bring my brother back. However, we can make legislative changes to ensure that having a mental health crisis does not become a death sentence for anyone else, right? And so over time, what I saw was that in a nutshell, we cannot continue to expect our oppressors to be our saviors because they won't. And my advocacy grew from not just mental health and racial and criminal justice, but looking at things from a bigger lens and saying, Princess, this is not about you, because I was want to quickly say to you, I don't like politics. I want to stay just as far away from this nasty monster as possible. But I also understand that you can't keep whining and complaining about a problem and not be willing to be a part of the solution. And so when we look at things as a science teacher, from environmental justice to looking at racial justice to house injustice, our broken criminal injustice system, looking at our healthcare system. I have worked with teachers who have two working parents, and one of them, the majority of their income goes just towards paying health insurance for their family, right? So again, we have so many pieces of the puzzle that must be addressed. And I believe that for too long, we have been given crumbs from A to Z, and we deserve the full course meal. And, I begged and pleaded with legislators, and we know that here in Virginia, the Democratic Party is the majority in the House and the Senate, and we have a Democratic governor. So they have the votes, they have the upper hand. However, they refuse to push far enough to put people over profit, And so again, it was out of necessity that I said, I can't sit and complain. I need to take that bold and courageous step and say, you know what, Princess, you may not know everything, but I know how to network with other people who may be experts in certain areas. And I know how to fight fearlessly. And I will do that for every last Virginian. And so that's why I'm here today. That's why I am taking this step. And I am very unapologetic about it. And some people say to me, well, you are not an experienced politician. I say, you're right. I'm not an experienced politician. I am an impacted Virginian. Okay. And to me, that's the best person to be in this seat, because oftentimes our leaders get up on this high platform and they forget where they came from, or they never been there in the first place, to be able to understand, working class Virginians and our concerns, our voices, and our needs. And I'm here to claim that full course meal for all of us. And so it was out of necessity that, over this summer, myself and other amazing people, community members across the Commonwealth, came together, and it started off with little conversations saying that, we need to rise up a strong independent party. And again, I think at that point, it was chatter. It was definitely chatter out of frustration. And then that chatter started to grow, and people started to come together, and they said, let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a chance. And we know that, people say that the odds are against us, that third parties aren't normally successful, but I'm a strong believer that the only battle lost is the battle that's never fought. So somebody has to try, and we're here for it. So the Liberation Party in general believes that liberation is a human right, not a privilege, and we must start making sure that our legislators, that our laws reflect that for all Virginians.